It's that time of year when we'll be doing the majority, if not all of our cycling indoors, and so staying comfortable whilst in the saddle for hours each week is key. In this video, I'll share with you 7 tips that I've picked up over several years of cycling indoors on how to stay comfortable and train consistently throughout the winter. If you find any of these tips helpful, let me know in the comments below and we'll jump straight into the first tip. So the first tip I have for you is to use more than one fan. Most people know to use a fan cycling indoors regardless of the time of year or the intensity of the session, but in my experience one fan just doesn't cut it. Now I will admit I haven't tried the more expensive fans like the ones that are offered by Wahoo, so I can't compare it to those, but I found that my relatively large floor fan that cost around 40 quid isn't quite enough. It is relatively powerful, but I don't think that's the problem. The issue is the area in which it blows the air. It's not a massive area, and so I find it only really hits my torso, and that's with me on the hoods. Ideally I'd want it to blow the air into my face as well, but I couldn't get it in quite right regardless of the angle I tilted at, so I went online and looked for a small fan that could be mounted on the wall, and what I found has been pretty much perfect. I managed to mount it at just the right height, and it is adjustable, so I can swing it out depending on whether I'm a bit lower down on the hoods or sat upright. It's right next to me and super easy to reach, so I don't necessarily need to turn it on before I start my session, and I can adjust the intensity if I need to. This extra fan has really done wonders for keeping me cool, so I would encourage you to consider getting one similar if this is something like me you struggle with. Tip number 2 is to raise your front wheel up, which should hopefully relieve a bit of pressure down below. I have 2 of these super cheap Lifeline riser blocks which I got from Wiggle, and they cost less than a tenner each. There are 2 different slots for your front wheel, with one being a bit higher up than the other, so there is a degree of adjustment. If you find the higher slot to still not be quite high enough, you could do what I did and screw the block into a piece of plywood just to raise it up there a little bit more. I really haven't noticed any change to my position or anything like that whilst I'm on the bike, but I did find sitting in the saddle was that little bit more comfortable with the wheel raised up a bit. The next tip is to wear noise cancelling headphones whilst you're on the bike. I use one of the top end trainers, being the Wahoo Kicker, and even that can be quite noisy. Before using the Kicker, I had an old Be Cool trainer which was even louder, and I know how annoying that noise can be if you have nothing to drown it out with. So when it comes to noise cancelling headphones, I use the AirPods Pro, which have a noise cancelling feature, and they do a pretty good job at masking the noise from the trainer. It can seem a bit odd to begin with, and your voice does sound strange to yourself if you're talking with someone with the noise cancellation on. I found them to work better and generally feel a bit more natural if you're actually listening to something at the same time and not just having noise cancellation on to block out the noise from the trainer. With the noise cancellation on and listening to something, I can barely hear the trainer, if at all. Now to be honest, I've tried even using the normal transparency mode recently and found that it still does a really good job at blocking out the unwanted noise whilst making it easier to hear things happening around you. There are no doubt better noise cancelling headphones out there, but I found the AirPods to be perfect for what I need them for. Plus they're super convenient to use between all of my Apple devices. So although you probably don't need necessarily to get noise cancelling headphones, they will definitely do a better job at blocking out the noise from the trainer. My 4th tip for you is to look into adding some clip-on bars if you're using a road bike indoors. Now this isn't at all relevant if you're using a TT bike as you already have the pads and the extensions in place, but I found using the pads to be really helpful for me recently as I spend more time indoors. Now of course they don't provide any aero benefit or anything like that, but they do give you 2 extra hand positions to move between. You can be down with your forearms on the pads as you would expect to be, or you can just place your hands on top of the pads themselves to raise yourself up a little bit. I found this to be really useful during those longer sessions where it's nice to mix up your position a bit so you don't get too uncomfortable sat in the same position for potentially hours on end. I would use the extension poles as well, but the ones I have at the moment aren't quite long enough for me. But I'm not too worried about this as you don't actually need to hold on to anything indoors anyway. I just rest my forearms on the pads and keep my hands together. I am looking at getting some better extensions that do actually fit me, but for the time being this setup is perfect for adding in those 2 extra positions. The 5th tip I have is to use good quality bib shorts. Now it can be tempting to keep your best bibs for use outdoors, but I would argue it's more important to keep at least a couple of pairs ready to use indoors instead. The thing is with cycling indoors is that you're stuck in pretty much a fixed position the whole time. Outdoors you'll naturally move around a bit, like when you stop at a junction or you climb out the saddle, but we don't really have those options indoors on a stationary bike. Now you could get a rocker plate, but I don't have any experience with one, and so I can't really comment on how effective they are. Anyway, as there isn't much movement, I try and keep some of my better bib shorts for use indoors or on a longer ride outdoors, and then keep the ones that aren't quite as good, be it because of the thickness or the position of the chamois or the actual fit of the shorts themselves, for my relatively short commute to and from work. It can be tempting to just buy the cheapest bib shorts you can find, but in my experience, like with most things, you tend to get what you pay for. My next tip is to not forget a towel, even if you are using the fans to keep you cool. In my experience, the fans aren't enough, and I need to have a towel at hand regardless of the intensity of the session I'm doing. Not only can one be used to obviously wipe the sweat away, but also to protect your bike if you drape it over the handlebars. A microfiber towel is the way forward compared to one that is cotton based, as you'll find it dries a bit quicker, plus they are pretty cheap to buy. I always have a few on hand in the drawer, as being caught out not having a towel and having to wipe sweat away with your already sweaty t-shirt isn't fun. Now the final tip I have for you is to use a combination of smart plugs and a smart speaker to control things with your voice whilst you're already on the bike. Being in the garage, it is pretty cold this time of year, and so I don't necessarily want the fans on before I'm even sat on the bike. If I wanted to turn the floor fan on, I'd have to get off the bike, but with the smart plug, I can turn it on with just my voice. Alexa, fan on. My other fan is within arm's reach, so I don't bother with a smart plug for that, but it has been a godsend for the floor fan. When I'm ready for the fan to be turned on, usually 5 to 10 minutes into a ride, I'll just ask my Amazon Echo to turn it on. The fan is the only thing I control with a smart plug, but I'm sure there are other uses for one. You can pick them up pretty cheap these days, and I've certainly found mine to be useful, so would recommend them. Just remember you'll need some way of actually turning them on. You could use an app on your phone, but even that is a bit of a faff, so having a smart speaker nearby is definitely the way forward. So there you have 7 tips on how to stay comfortable on the bike this winter and keep training consistently. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, you might want to check out this video just here, where I show you how a treadmill fits into my pain cave and how I run on Zwift with just my Garmin watch. The weather has been awful recently, so the treadmill has come in really handy. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.